Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for you electing to spend some of your time here today talking about chatbots and BigQuery and data sources. My name is Reza Rokni, and I'm one of the solution architects here at Google. Been here over 5 years, predominantly out of the UK office, but recently moved over to lovely, sunny Singapore. Part of the solution architect's role is to look at new use cases, new applications of our technology, work with customers very closely to actually build out some minimum viable product pieces, etc. And then if we find a good match, our next role is to do things like blogs and solution papers to scale that out. One of the best parts of my jobs is working with some fantastic people like James.
Thanks, Rez, and thank you all for being here. My name's James Tromans. I work at Citigroup as part of the capital markets FX trading team, where I'm head of data science there. And today we're going to talk to you a little bit about how we've combined different Google technologies to ideally enhance our client experience for both internal users of our products, but as well as external users as well. And we'll be building on technologies like Dialogflow, BigQuery, and PubSub. This project originated probably 2 years ago when Rez and I were doing some work with Thomson Reuters. If you're not familiar with Thomson Reuters, they're a market data company, among other things. And at Citi, we were interested in consuming some of that market data, very large amounts of it, through BigQuery, so that we could do different types of mathematical analytic queries, visualizations, and that sort of thing. And from there, we decided, well, wouldn't it be interesting if we could do some more unusual types of ways to get at that data and surface insights for our users in a different way? So the first part of this talk, is the clicker working? Great. Is going to discuss the business goals and also some of the constraints within which we had to work in order to achieve what we wanted to. And so I just thought I'd give you an indication of the scale of the foreign exchange and local markets business at Citi, because that points to some of the opportunities that we have in terms of being able to reach lots of customers in different countries, but also some of the challenges. So we have thousands of clients, from corporate clients to hedge funds to real money clients, and we deal with hundreds of different types of assets. We actually have trading desks physically in 77 different countries, but obviously we're one very large bank. And we deal in about 160 countries and jurisdictions overall, and we actually do about 4 trillion US dollar transactions totally per day. So with that scale comes great opportunity, but it also brings some challenges. As our business has evolved, electronification is a phrase that we use to describe the fact that much more is happening now through electronic channels, through APIs, or even just through chat. Less is happening through phone conversations, and so with that means we have more data. We collect more data than ever before, both in terms of the market data that I alluded to earlier, but also trade data. And with that, if we want to do computation on that, we need more powerful compute, we need more different types of compute, we need more storage. So with electronification as the backdrop, we also notice that our users are becoming more technologically literate. So, a graduate from 15 years ago who came out of university, or 10 years ago, who may have been using Facebook back then if he was an early adopter or she was an early adopter, is now the sort of person that's expecting more from their technology in their professional workplace as well. What they're comfortable with at home, they obviously expect at work. And I think in many industries, professional technology relationships take a longer time to mature in terms of how the users interact with their technology when compared with their personal. So we're mindful of this, and we want to make sure that we can provide as good of an experience in your professional working engagement with Citi as you do with your private ones, with your other technology experiences, like when you work with Gmail. Now, technology is used to empower the existing teams that we have, and I think as a data scientist, I'm always very interested in how we can use data and modern machine learning algorithms to empower the people and the staff to better serve our clients. So Citi itself produces a very large amount of data, and that's probably one of our largest competitive advantages. And so we want to make sure that we provide the right tooling to our teams so that they can expose interesting insights to our clients when they need to, on demand, at the click of a button, or in a very seamless way. And we need to be able to do that in a way that's going to scale to meet all of the different types of customers that we have in all of the different countries that we operate. Now, as I mentioned, with all of the different types of businesses that we have to make sure that whatever we build now is going to fit within our existing technological infrastructure. So we have our own data, as I mentioned. We have lots of existing technology, and we have our own data centers and our own networks, all of which already exist today. So there's no way that we can build something that's entirely cloud native, that doesn't sit and interrupt with exactly what we already have working on-premise. So we need to make sure that whatever we build is going to work within this, and that means that we're going to have to think about the architecture of the application and how that's going to fit with what we have. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. So it needs to integrate with existing user interfaces. We're talking about a chatbot or a conversational UI. So we have existing tools, right, that our own staff and our clients are already working with. So we need to keep this in mind. It's not just about greenfield projects all the time and leaving legacy technical debt behind with you as well. So we've got to make sure we deal with that. And ultimately, if we do choose to go cloud native, we need to make sure that whatever we are building today doesn't need a rewrite in the future. So just to frame it all together, we're interested in looking at conversational user interfaces, chatbots, to address all of the challenges that I just mentioned, our scale, the amount of data that we have, and the way the technology within finance is changing and the way clients want to interact with us. We're looking at using data sets from Thomson Reuters, but also the data sets that we have on premise that are our own. And we're using technology like Dialogflow, which we'll demo you later, Google BigQuery, and PubSub to explore how we can build this conversational UI and make it work seamlessly. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Rez, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about the actual architecture and the application that we built.
Yeah, thanks, James. That last slide of James was interesting because it had quite a few components in there. And when we were planning out our chatbot, one thing that we rapidly came to the conclusion of is that no chatbot is an island. So while a chatbot, you can build an experience just purely as a chatbot, it's much more powerful in the application world when we apply it with other technologies and other backends. So being able to service the things that the users want integrated seamlessly with both stuff in the cloud and potentially on-premise. And for that, what you need is a platform, which, if you define a platform, it's a group of technologies that are used to base other technologies and applications on top of. So what we needed was a platform that could serve all of our needs around both the machine learning aspects, around Dialogflow itself, around natural language understanding, et cetera, but also, getting data from other sources, whether that's internal or within the cloud. And this is the current working platform that we put together when working with James. On your right-hand side, we see some of the systems where we're drawing our information from. So we have BigQuery as a store of data. And now BigQuery can support both the internal system data, but also the external data providers. And we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. We wanted to make sure that we could work with things like Spanner if we needed transactional activity, and PubSub for that messaging. But if you notice the internal systems as well, so whatever we built had to work with both of these paradigms. Also on your left-hand side, forgetting my left and right, we have the user side of the house. So this is the converting what a user says into actions. We use Dialogflow for that. We used Firebase to actually get the information that's been retrieved to the user. If you notice, we built this hub service. Now, what that hub does is actually coordinate and interact all of these communication channels. The reason we did that is because we wanted easy drop in and out of other components. So, for example, we used Firebase, but internally within Citi, they have other systems that can update clients. So the system needed to be able to deal with two types of things very easily within any part of this component architecture. And actually looking towards the future and towards other things that we'd like to add to the platform.
Sure, yeah. So when we think about what Dialogflow is going to be doing for us, Dialogflow serves to sit between the inquiries from a user and then what you actually want to serve as a fulfillment request to the user. And so I'm interested in saying, okay, we have all of this proprietary data, but we also have a lot of proprietary algorithms, right? We're a bank. And so if I have a user that's interested in asking quite a challenging question that's going to take a quant library that we've built over 15 years to answer, that's very much a custom-crafted model approach which we have on-premise working already. So we need to integrate the two. But of course, as we move forward, and as we're already doing today, we're interested in using more modern machine learning algorithms from open source libraries, whether that's XGBoost or scikit-learn or or TensorFlow, whatever we're going to service the request from the client with, whatever the inference tool that we're going to use to do that, it needs to work there as well. So you've kind of got completely custom stuff on-premise, a middle ground with reusing open source technology. And then, obviously, we'd be silly not to think forward to the future where we might be using some of Google's hosted model solutions, so some of the existing off-the-shelf managed solutions from a machine learning perspective as well.
So obviously, there's a lot of technology that we used in building out this application, containers, BigQuery, Spanner, Firebase. And we're not going to have a chance to walk through all of those things. There's lots of great sessions that have a lot of material on that. I'm only going to walk through two components. One is BigQuery as one of our data sources, and the other one is obviously Dialogflow itself. So just a little bit about BigQuery, if you're not familiar already. It's Google's petabyte-scale data warehouse in the cloud. Like any data warehouse, it is ANSI SQL. It has the ability to build dashboards, to run ad hoc queries. It also has a streaming API, which means you can actually upsert streams of information into BigQuery, and when you make a call, it's up-to-date data. And that will come in useful in a moment when we show some of the demos. The other part of it is fully managed and serverless. In other words, the bank doesn't need to set up anything to make use of it. So one component and part of the architecture for BigQuery, which was particularly helpful here, is this idea of separation of storage from processing. Now, what that means, there's two benefits for yourself. So one, in terms of processing, if you're not running a query, then you're not paying for any machines to be ready for accepting that query. But the other benefit is around sharing of data. So if you think of a traditional database, you have the database software that you install, you attach SAN, NAS, disk, etc. to that, then you load data into it. Now, to share data, you either have to give access to the database, and I used to be a DBA, and that's not something I'd give very easily, or you need to build an application layer, or you need to do the FTP dance, which is never pretty. However, because of this separation, what you can have is data stored in a project, as long as the correct security and ACLs have been done, can be shared with other projects. So within an internal, very large organization like Citi, they can, if they're uploading data, they can, again, with the right security and ACL levels, share data amongst themselves. But also, it allows you to blend in data from external sources very easily. And a very good example of this is work that we did with Thomson Reuters, with quite a few banks. So obviously, Thomson Reuters have a huge data set that is available through their web service APIs. But for POCs, they also work with us with providing that data onto BigQuery for the banks to consume. And that gives us access to 20 years of historical tick data. They also do near real time, so within seconds, they can do inserts into our database. And again, the benefits here is that once you've gone through the right security and the access levels, there's nothing else for the bank to do other than run queries. What I'm going to do is just do a quick demo of this. If we can go over to the laptop, please. Thank you. And that is a giant screen. I better not make any mistakes. OK, so this is the new BigQuery user interface. I'm not going to run through all of the capabilities here. I just want to highlight one particular thing, and that is that we are currently in this project, FX project, which is the one I've used to do my development testing with for James. And within this project, on the left-hand side, we can see other projects that are available because I've got access to them. I've been authorized against them. So obviously, there's the project that I'm in. But further down, we can see this TR EMS project. Now, this is a project that Thomson Reuters own. And they have given me access to data sets within that project. I'm going to just quickly go down to one data set, which is New York Stock Exchange information. Here, we have a table. I'm just going to select details. So this table is 5 terabytes and 40 billion rows of information. Now, for me to run a query, I'm going to run this query on the top here against that data. So I'm running this query in my project. I haven't moved any data around, and it's working against the data that I've been authorized against in Thomson Reuters project. So that will take about 25 to 30 seconds. That particular query, volume-weighted average price, you wouldn't normally run it against all the data. I'm just doing that to show that we can do it against 30 billion rows. Takes about 25 to 27 seconds to complete. There was no need for me to do my tap dance routine, which is very good for you. Here we see 63 was the result. I'm going to just show one other table. I won't run a query against it. And that is in this dataset 213, which has FX currency data. And just the thing to highlight from the details, if I can get my mouse, move this properly, this particular table has a streaming buffer. What that means is that Thomson Reuters is currently pushing data into this table, and it is being updated in near real time, within seconds. So when a query is run against that table, we get live update information. OK, so with that, if we go back to the slides, please. So that's one of the data sets that we're going to be using. Thank you. So now towards Dialogflow. So and as I said, I've been here 5 years, and it's really great to see all the icons popping in and how full these charts are becoming. So out of our cloud AI solution set here, we are going to be talking about Dialogflow, which allows us to build a conversational interface against when users ask for information. We can extract information from the intents that they have. And one of the nice things about Dialogflow is that it is making more and more use of all the ML capabilities that we have inbuilt into the product itself. So natural language understanding, so we have sentiment analysis now within it, we have speech to text. All of these components are just coming out of the box with Dialogflow. In terms of the use cases that we are going to talk about, so the one that we predominantly worked with James on was around the business to employees. So this is helping the traders make decisions. And we're looking in the future to potentially towards doing stuff around their customers. In terms of Dialogflow itself, and we'll go through this in a little bit more detail when we do a demo, there is an agent. You can try and think of an agent as a sort of an NLU module. It's an encapsulation of entities, intents, and contexts. What an intent is when a user provides some information, like says a sentence, the intent allows us to map that sentence to actions that we're going to be taking. What entities do, so often when we want to take an action against a sentence, we need to extract information, and entities allows us to extract those parameters. A context gives us where we are in the conversational space. So if a user, for example, has currently asked for information about euro-dollar currencies, and then the next question is, give me news, then we know, because they were talking about euro-dollar, that that's what they intend us to go and fetch. And then we have the fulfillment service, which allows us to make calls to all these other back-end services. And with that, we're going to go now to a demo of the client working within the Citi environment.
All right. So just before I let it run, I'm going to just orientate you to what you're seeing here. Hopefully you can read that. So on the right-hand side of the screen, or I should say the right 2/3 of the screen, is an existing internal application within Citi. We call it the Trader Toolkit. And for the purposes of this demo, I produced a simple dashboard which comprises 2 widgets. One is a chart widget, which is in the top half, and the other is a table. And that table contains interesting economic, macroeconomic events that are relevant for the particular asset that's being plotted. On the left-hand side, you'll see that we have, if you're familiar with Dialogflow already, an out-of-the-box chat UI. Now, obviously, you'd integrate this with your own chat system if you're going to embed this into your product. So Citi has some of its own technology which this would embed to. And of course, anything that offers an API, this could work with. So I'm going to set the demo to play. So we recorded this approximately a week and a half ago, I think. When did we do it? The 16th or the 7th. And so the user on the left is going to ask to draw a chart of euro-dollar. So once they did that, immediately in real time, we haven't sped anything up, the client application on the right-hand side took that information and was able to change the chart in the top half of the screen, and the second bottom half of the screen updated as well. And so in order for that to happen, 2 things needed to take place. The idea of drawing a chart, this intent, and the entities needed to be extracted, in this case euro-dollar, or the euro-dollar exchange rate. You'll see these circles on the chart which show the relevant economic events, and the colors of the circles depict how important they are, and the number is kind of the weight of how important that event is. And so the user can now interactively say, okay, How about dollar yen, different currency pair, the Japanese currency against the dollar? And so you'll notice that they didn't have to say chart or show me something. It's just like, very conversational. It's carried forward the context of the fact that the user's interested in charting, and it's obviously understood that it's extracting a different entity, in this case, dollar yen. So the user can now interact with the application, they can fiddle around, they can explore and do some analysis. So it's getting slightly more complex now. We can do other things. So we can have other types of intents. So the user's now saying, OK, please scatter plot euro against yen. And because the application, again, is context aware, it knows that the user is intending to plot euro dollar against dollar yen. So here is an interactive scatter plot, the x-axis being euro dollar and the y-axis being dollar yen. And some of this existing functionality that we have within the application, the user can play around, and instead of plotting just the raw values, they can plot things like percentage rank, and they can change the look-back windows over which that's calculated, and so on. So we've got simple charting intents, we've got slightly more plotting intents embedded into this application, but we can go further, we can do more. So the next one I want to show you is this concept of a backtesting intent. So the user's now going to say backtest, what did they do? Euro dollar after dollar yen is greater than 110. So currency rates obviously have values, and the user's interested in knowing what happens to one currency when a different currency goes above a certain value. And so in order for this to happen, we didn't just have to get the intent and the entities, we also had to have this condition. And so it's brought up this study of what happens, and you'll see at the top, we have this sort of time series, and the blue dots represent every time that event occurred. And in the middle chart, we have the average price path up to 24 hours later, showing you what's happened to the euro-dollar exchange rate after dollar yen has gone greater than 110. As you click in, you get the distribution of returns below. So it's kind of like a nice study for the user to be able to interact with. So shifting gears slightly, moving away from just controlling the user interface, what happens if we actually wanted to engage with our customers so that they could buy something from us? And we have a lot of custom lingo in finance, which you'll see some of it now. So the user's asking to chart euro against the dollar. That's the standard when they say that. And then they're going to ask for a price. So the way in which a customer or salesperson may choose to do that is quite specific. They say, how wide and 9 million? So they're interested in a price that we'd be willing as a bank to buy to them, sell to them and buy back from them 9 million euro dollar. And we only quote the last 2 digits of the exchange rate. We have these conventions. So we're showing 49 on one side and 51 on the other. And the user's saying mine, that's lingo for buy. They want to buy. So they're interested in picking one of those prices. They didn't tell us in advance which one. They want to buy it, and so they've said mine, and we've returned with transaction complete. And here's an example transaction ID explaining to them what they've done. So following on with this kind of idea of having to train up on different lingo, we have this concept of cable. So if you're not from finance, cable is the Great British Pound against the dollar. It's a specific terminology just for that pair. And so they've asked to plot that, and then they're going to, instead of buy, this time the user's going to say, OK, make me 3 million, different way of asking for the price. Instead of how wide, they've said make me 3 million. So we've given back them a quote specifically for 3 million cable. And it's the same price because we haven't integrated this with our pricing API, but that would be the next step. And then they've said done left-hand side. And that means that they're interested in selling, and they've done so the transaction has completed. So just to kind of summarize what's taken place here, we've controlled the UI to enable the user to do some exploratory data analysis, look around at charts, look at the relevant economic events, do some backtesting, and then having done that analysis, they've decided that they wanted to move into a transactional business engagement with us. And we've trained Dialogflow on very customized, specific terminology, and we'll talk a little bit about how you do that in a minute. Over to Rez for another demo.
Thank you. Can you switch to the laptop, please? Thank you. So obviously, I don't have access to their internal system. So when I'm playing and trying to explore stuff for James, we built a sort of parallel agent. And I have no talent in UI, so one of my colleagues in Singapore built this for us. In principle, it's the same kind of thing. It has a graph of information. We also have some news information underneath that we populate from Thomson Reuters again. The data that we provided for is, this is 2015 that we have access to from Thomson Reuters. So what I'm going to do is just show that this is fairly similar to the application we had before. Here we have sterling being shown. So I'm going to do show me a graph of euro, dollar. Now when I go back, that should have changed. And let's see how dry my mouth is. We'll soon find out. Show me a graph of pound sterling. There you go. And show me news on pound sterling. Okay, so my mouth isn't that dry. So that actually changed underneath as well. Sorry, I didn't have that highlighted. That was just Dialogflow. The same intents were being used. We're now using the speech-to-text to actually convert what I was saying into text that was being represented on the graph. So in terms of Dialogflow itself, just to go through a few pieces before we do another small demo around some new features that have been added to Dialogflow. So this is the Dialogflow user interface. I'm currently in my FX tester environment, which is just a play environment to work around with intents. For those of you not familiar with Dialogflow, we have the idea of intents to actually convert text into actions and entities. What I usually start with is entities. In this case, the entities that we have available are things that I've put in, including currency. Now, the currency entity, Dialogflow does have a system-built entity called currency that would normally suffice for any currency activity. However, as James demonstrated, there's a lot of domain-specific language that we use here, and therefore I built my own currency entity so I can overload it with the domain-specific language that we need. For example, if we go to Australian dollar, so by doing that, I brought up the entity Australian dollar. This is the symbol, and these are the synonyms that are associated with it. At the end, we have Aussie as a one of the domain-specific languages. GBP. So I'm going to add one to this. So this is Great British Pounds, and where I grew up in Northolt, we don't actually refer to pounds as pounds. Down where I work, it's quids, mate. Like two quid for a pint, showing my age. It's been a long time since it's 2 quid for a pint. So for that, I'm going to put quid. And essentially, that's all I have to do to actually teach it that quid equates to pound sterling. Now, when I go to do an intent, so we have various intents. I'm just going to show one of the intents, which is the graph intent, which you've seen quite a few times in the demo now. This graph intent takes a series of phrases. I'm going to put one in now. Show me a graph of quid versus dollar. So I just added quid as a synonym for that entity. What the Dialogflow does very nicely for me is when I type that sentence in, it's already figured out that some of the values that I've put in are currencies. It's already highlighted those for me. And this is step one of extracting the parameters that we need from this intent. So if I scroll down, we can actually see the actions and parameters. Here I've defined the input graph action. This calls my code at the back end to actually invoke that handler. We also have some parameters. So, for example, the currency parameter. If you notice on this side, we've ticked this box under required. So if a user says, show me a graph, and they don't provide a currency to me, I don't know what to draw. So we're going to prompt them to give us the currency. And that's all inbuilt into Dialogflow. If I click on the prompts, so these are a couple of the prompts that will be provided to the user as we get them to give us the currencies that we're interested in. If you notice, we've added more than one prompt. This is like good UI design for conversations to make the user feel a little bit more comfortable with using the chatbot if you give different sentences for the same questions. Outside of this piece, I'm going to just show a new piece of functionality that has been added to Dialogflow. So I'm going to go to one of my user environments, so FX. This is where we've actually got things wired up. And one of the things I find particularly useful when working and developing on here is the test UI that you can use on the right-hand side. So here, if I do show me a graph of yen versus dollar, so what this is doing is we can see the response that was given, but much more interestingly, it gives us information about what Dialogflow extracted from that sentence. So I can see the action is correct, input.graph. I can see that the parameter is currency, and it's picked out yen, US dollar. We have some extra information, which is not part of the demo today. Also, particularly useful is diagnostic info. So here, we actually see all the raw JSON responses that it is sending to the backend services. And this is super useful when you're doing debug and testing. Just take the JSON from there, put it into a message, and then call your backend web service. So the thing I'm going to show you now is a little bit of a different flow from the one that we saw with James. So I've got a currency. Now I'm going to say, quote me 2 million. My one is not as integrated as James's. So I just say, here's a quote for 2 million XXYY. If you notice, however, there is a sentiment score attached to it. And this has been built into Dialogflow. I think it was just recently announced. And this provides a negative or positive sentiment to the statement given. Now, that statement that I asked, give me a quote, didn't have any sentiment. Let's say I was not happy with that price. And I'm British, so I'm not going to swear at the system. So we're going to say, that's a terrible, actually I had that there, terrible, awful price, which is as strong as I like to get in English. Here, we can actually see that the response was, oh, please don't get mad. Now, obviously, Citi would put a far more professional response to that thing. But the reason it said that is if I scroll down, we have a sentiment score of 0.9 negative. Now, if I go to some of my code to show how we implemented this, what we do is that intent, the handler for that intent, looks at the sentiment score for that sentence. If it goes over a threshold, and you'll notice that the threshold's quite low, I've deliberately set that, it's going to fire a different response to the user. Instead of, sorry, we couldn't help you, oh, please don't get mad. Now, the other thing that it does is it logs to PubSub, which is our global publish and subscribe API, the message with the negative sentiment. And what this allows us to do is to have systems that can react to if a customer, for example, is getting angry at us. Now, the sentiment score I showed you was per that sentence. However, you can have an overall sentiment score for the whole conversation. And this starts getting very, very interesting in kind of things that we can now do with the chatbot. The other thing of integration that we built was all of the intents I log to BigQuery. Now, the results I'm just dumping as raw JSON. I use BigQuery can extract JSON information. So every intent, everything that's being done is being logged. If I run the query, it actually will show just what's at the bottom anyway. But here we have the different intents, a confidence score in how confident we were that that was the intent the user had, and the sentiment score that was associated with it. Now, the reason this is interesting is if we have a mechanism for PubSub to notify us something's going wrong, and we have the history of the conversation, we can...
Right, yeah. So, I mean, you can imagine if you're building this for your own teams, as I was thinking about it at Citi, if you're automatically serving requests from customers, in our case, it's both internal users and external, especially in the case of external customers, you want to be thinking about, okay, we're automatically serving them, but what happens if something goes wrong? And it might not even have gone wrong. Perhaps just the customer is dissatisfied with something when they came to you, even before the conversation. And so you may choose to actually have something published onto PubSub. Obviously, that's real time. And you can surface an alert to a user, a Citi employee, in my case, who can actually then field that request manually and slot in back into the chat and take control. And by publishing all of the previous requests through the Dialogflow interface, whether that's your own or something else, into BigQuery, you obviously have the history. So although we didn't build it for the demo, you can imagine how you've been alerted. You have all the history of what's come before. The user can read up, understand the chat, and start getting involved in the conversation very quickly. So that's obviously quite an important, I would say, prerequisite as you start getting into beyond traditional just FAQs and you start doing something a little more involved. This would be something that's quite nice to have and now possible.
Okay, thank you. Can we go back to the slides, please? Fantastic. There we go. So in terms of the architecture patterns, there are two types. There's standard deployment. So there's a lot of things that you can do just with out-of-the-box integrations with Dialogflow. That's both on the front end and the back end we're using Firebase functions. In our example, we use this very decoupled deployment because of the complex environment that we're in and some hybrid requirements. So just to cover the standard architecture, the out-of-the-box integrations, a couple of clicks, and you get things integrated. It takes care of all the things of like when a user makes a call to the front end, the queries get sent onto Dialogflow for you. You have things like you can write simple cloud functions to deal with the fulfillment side of things. In terms of our architecture, if we dive into what that actually means, that flow, let's start picking this a little bit apart. So first of all, the fulfillment side of the house, this is a webhook call. So now, if you want to decouple that, you can just stand up a RESTful web service and absorb these calls and give the response wherever you choose to stand up your web service. On the other side of the house, although we didn't show it in the demo, we were using standard client, it will be important for the client to be outside of the standard integrations because, for example, we would want the authentication and authorization for the client to be done within Citi using Citi's mechanisms. And this means we end up with a topology where we are going to have the client be essentially something that the user builds and proxies to Dialogflow. So this is going back to our complex environment document. So here, we have that flow, right? So we have a user that is an application that can use authentication and authorization from within the environment that exists within Citi. It can then communicate through the hub service through to all of these other systems. This is the flowchart of how this would work. If you imagine the client is now a piece of code that's sitting in a container at Citi. The user logs in. They're going to do authentication, authorization with the hub. And the code in the hub we put into a container, which meant it was easily portable between our environments. The authorization once done, the user can then start putting in requests. That request is sent to the hub. The hub then takes that request, piggybacks it onto another HTTP call over to Dialogflow. We get the response from Dialogflow. The hub can respond with, we're going to be creating the graph for you. If you imagine a trader is typing on one screen, they've got, and I've been into those rooms, they've got like tons of screens. It's really cool. Then, in the meantime, the hub will also then do things like make calls to BigQuery to extract the tick data that was available from Thomson Reuters. It will then, once it receives that data, we send that information onto Firebase to allow the clients to be updated. So that's when I was calling into Dialogflow and you saw the graph being updated, that's what we were using to achieve that. So, lessons learned.
Yeah, so I think when you're thinking about using something like Dialogflow yourself, I mean, the architecture that we've come up with was something that I asked Rez to help us with because we have quite a lockdown network. We have a lot of existing constraints and rules that we have to follow. And so the hub architecture really enabled us to work within those requirements. Whereas out of the box, Dialogflow gives you a lot of this functionality. If you're going to be cloud native already or it's a completely greenfield project, there's a lot you don't have to build. So the hub gives us that flexibility to take something that we already have and move towards something that's going to look like production. Whereas if you were just starting this from scratch, you would be able to do this more simply. So you kind of have the best of both worlds. When we started this, in my mind, I kind of had the idea of what conversations I wanted to encode into the Dialogflow framework. I had the lingo. I knew the way this was going to work. So we kind of jumped in. And there's me talking with Rez, and we're going through this, and we're kind of getting excited with how quickly and easily we're able to build some of this stuff. But of course, I'd recommend, like with any architectural design process, or even your actual software implementation process, you actually do sit down kind of with a pen and paper and work out what you want to do first, rather than just jump in, because you need to make sure that you make some assumptions that are the correct ones at the beginning, because otherwise you're going to end up unpicking some of the stuff you've done later. So are your conversations correct for Dialogflow in the first place? Okay, let's say they are. You want to make sure you know who the target audience is for your chatbot, like any product. And then you want to work out for that target audience, what are the number one things that we're spending time doing now that we don't want to do, or that we can do a better job of doing by automating? So what are your key use cases? And then you need a persona, right? So in finance, generally speaking, people are doing a lot of work every day. It's very transactional. It's quick. It's fast. There's not much small talk, really. And so you want this persona to be quite, efficient so that you can move on and do the next thing that you need to do. So then you want to sample, you want to design things out, you want to test, and that's the green section here. So spending more time doing that at the beginning is going to help you a lot later on down the line.
And actually, one thing from that previous slide that I found particularly interesting is it's very easy when you're building out the conversation and the intents to assume that other people will ask it in the same kind of way. Being from London and working with a lot of folks from the US, etc., I know that to be very not true now. And it's very useful to get some intents up and running, and then get colleagues, and I'd actually say colleagues from different countries if you can, to actually try it out. It's amazing the different kind of variations that you get. And one thing we didn't show you was how easy it is to do training with Dialogflow. So you get one of these sessions, and like, it's almost like a jam session, right? You sit down and everyone tries to fool the system. You find different ways of actually asking the questions, and then use that to train it. And when you're doing the training, make sure that part of the training hasn't exposed a different branch of the conversation that you need to build in, right? So it's very easy to start trying to overload a single branch of the conversation, and rather than saying, okay, actually the intent has now changed, we should create a separate intent to cover that kind of flow. The other one from that first one is the tail latency. So what you'll find is that you'll very quickly get the chatbot up and running in terms of the standard flow of the conversation. Spend just as much time on the bits of the conversation that might be broken, right? So if the user goes down the wrong path, the contexts get incorrectly set up, spend just as much time there, because a couple of negative experiences from a user, and then they're going to be reluctant to use the chatbot again.
Just on the training, I think one thing I should add is when I started doing this, at first you're like, okay, like chart me euro dollar, show me this, plot that, and you're kind of like showing a bunch of examples, and you're thinking, I could just write this myself with regular expressions, like what's the big deal? And that was how I came to this, and I was like, But what you quickly realize is through the workflow that Dialogflow gives you, you can quickly tag like, okay, this is the intent, this is the entities. But you've given it like maybe half a dozen or whatever, 3, 4, 5, and someone then uses the tool in a way which you hadn't trained it on. And that's when you start to be like, that was my aha moment, when I was like, oh, actually, it's going to understand this thing that I didn't train it on. And subtly, and I think quite importantly, if you're into language, like understanding that, something, plot me, whatever that might be, and then the entities, you could ask that in a different way, right? You could ask that like, euro dollar, show me a chart of that. And Dialogflow gets robust to these types of things as long as you've given it a sensible amount of seeded information. And that was one of the key things that I really liked about the tool that at first I didn't quite get.
And thanks, James. And the other piece when you're drawing out these conversations, draw out some flowcharts using the tools that Dialogflow has in terms of like slot filling, which was where we asked for currencies when one wasn't given. Now, context, which we didn't show you, allows you to store the context of a conversation as you branch. I think it was very, very useful to actually just pencil these things out and then go and build the intents. What you'll probably find is as you're penciling these things out as well, you'll find some branches that don't make sense, and you'll fix them up. So with that, some final thoughts, James?
Yeah, so hopefully you guys have got a good feel about how you can use Dialogflow within existing applications, also within existing infrastructure, depending on the company that you're coming from. And I think I'll loop this back to the beginning, which is what seeded this initial idea, which we actually haven't fully fleshed out yet. But for us, because we have so much data, and we are a large bank, and we service a lot of different clients, we think that one of our unique benefits is that we can bring the right type of data to the client when they need it. And so for me, I was thinking about, okay, what happens if both an internal user comes to a trader who's very busy and they're managing their portfolio, and that user wants to say to the trader, why did the exchange rate of this asset just spike over the last 15 minutes? What caused that? Now, we have all of the trade information that happened up to that point. We have all the economic event data up to that point. We have all the market data up to that point. It's not beyond the realms of possibility, and we've been building this so that you can programmatically produce a natural language response to that query that draws on all of this data and frames it in such a way that it's human readable and it's nice to read, right? So we can say, we're seeing a lot of leveraged investors buying because, the economic release that just happened was weaker than we thought, and, we're now at the 94th percentile rank for the month for this exchange rate, and so we're seeing a lot of, momentum in that direction. You could produce that report programmatically through the data that we have, and you could imagine a user asking for that just quickly on a chat, being like, why did this happen? You could respond in chat in kind. And so for me, where I want to take this project is more down these lines. I think Dialogflow is great for FAQs, it's great for just the simple things, and for sure we'll be looking at that as well. But I think there's a lot more interesting, subtle things that you can do, which create this sort of overall ecosystem of text. And of course, there are some clients who just want everything over API, and that's fine too, but for the people that are in between, this is a great way to service many, many more clients with high-quality content. So we've covered a lot of ground. Hopefully you got a good feel for it, but that's it from me.
Okay. And just to say, there are some more sessions that are available running tomorrow. And again, thank you very much for spending some time with us this morning.